What color were Neanderthal hair and eyes? It's a simple question, but the answer tells us a lot. It tells us about them, and it tells us about us. For a long time, we pictured Neanderthals in a very specific way. Hunched over, hairy, dim-witted, and brutish, a kind of failed experiment in being human. Most of all, we pictured them as monotonous, a single, uniform species of caveman, all looking the same. This picture was wrong. We know that now. The evidence for it comes not just from new bone discoveries, but from something much smaller. Something hidden inside those bones. It comes from their DNA. Ancient DNA has completely changed our understanding of our closest extinct relatives. And it has started to paint a portrait of them, a portrait with color. So let's talk about that color. Hair, eyes, and skin. What did they really look like? The first thing to understand is that there is no single answer. That's probably the most important discovery of all. There was no one Neanderthal look. Imagine asking, what color are human hair and eyes? You can't give one answer. You'd have to say, well, it depends where you look. People in Scandinavia often have blonde hair and blue eyes. People in West Africa have dark hair and dark eyes. People in East Asia have dark hair and dark eyes. As people in Southern Europe have a whole range of colors. The variation is immense. It was likely the same for Neanderthals. They were not a flash in the pan. They were around for hundreds of thousands of years. They spread across a huge area, from Portugal and Wales in the west all the way to Siberia in the east. They lived through ice ages and warm periods. A group living in sunny Spain for 50,000 years would have faced different environmental pressures than a group living in the forests of Germany or the cold plains of Siberia. Over that much time and across that much space, populations adapt. They change. They diversify. So, the Neanderthal we might meet in the Middle East 120,000 years ago could have looked very different from one in France 50,000 years ago. The genetic evidence supports this idea of diversity, but it also gives us some specific tantalizing snapshots. The most famous of these snapshots involves red hair. The story of the red-haired Neanderthal begins in a cave in Spain called El Sidron. Scientists were able to extract ancient DNA from the bones of two Neanderthals found there. They weren't looking for hair color specifically, they were just trying to see what Neanderthal DNA looked like. But they found something fascinating. They looked at a gene called MC1R. In modern humans, the MC1R gene is often called the redhead gene. It gives instructions for making a protein that acts like a switch. This switch controls which type of pigment our cells produce. There are two main types of melanin, which is the stuff that gives color to our hair, skin, and eyes. There's eumelanin, which is black and brown, and there's pheomelanin, which is red and yellow. The MC1R protein sits on the surface of pigment-producing cells. When it's working properly, it tells the cell to produce the dark eumelanin. People with black or brown hair have a fully functioning MC1R gene, but sometimes a person inherits a version of the gene with a mutation. This mutation breaks the protein switch. It gets stuck in the off position. When that happens, the cell stops making much eumelanin and instead churns out the reddish pheomelanin. The result is red hair, often paired with pale skin and freckles. When scientists looked at the MC1R gene in the two El Sidron Neanderthals, they found a mutation. It was a variant that no one had ever seen in modern humans, but when they studied what this variant did, they found that it crippled the protein. It created a loss-of-function version, just like the mutations that cause red hair in people today. It broke the switch in the same way. The conclusion was hard to escape. These two Neanderthals, at least, likely had red hair and pale skin. This was a huge discovery. It was the first time we had a direct genetic link to a specific physical trait in a Neanderthal. It put a human face on them, a familiar one. We all know redheads. Suddenly, Neanderthals didn't seem so alien, but there's a twist to the story. The specific mutation the Neanderthals had is not found in modern redheads. Modern humans have several different MC1R variants that can lead to red hair, but the Neanderthal one isn't among them. This means that Neanderthals and modern humans evolved red hair independently. It's a case of what biologists call convergent evolution. Two different groups facing similar environmental pressures arrived at the same solution through different genetic paths. Why would red hair and pale skin evolve in the first place? The most common explanation has to do with sunlight and vitamin D. Our bodies need vitamin D to be healthy, especially for our bones. We get most of it from the sun. Specifically, our skin uses ultraviolet UV radiation from sunlight to synthesize it. In places with a lot of sun, like Africa, where humans first evolved, dark skin is a great advantage. It's rich in the dark pigment eumelanin, which acts as a natural sunblock, protecting the skin from UV damage and preventing the breakdown of a vital nutrient called folate. But as human populations, both Neanderthal and modern, moved north into Europe and Asia, the sun became a scarcer resource. The UV radiation was much weaker, especially in winter. Dark skin became a liability. It blocked too much of the precious UV, making it hard to produce enough vitamin D in this new environment. Mutations that reduce skin pigmentation were favored. Lighter skin allows more UV to penetrate, boosting vitamin D production. The evolution of red hair, which is strongly linked to pale skin through the MC1R gene, was likely part of this adaptation to low-light northern latitudes. Both Neanderthals and modern humans who settled in Europe needed to lighten up. And they both did, in their own unique ways. So, were all Neanderthals redheads? Almost certainly not. The discovery at El Sidon was just one piece of the puzzle. It gave us a glimpse of one variation, but other evidence soon followed that painted a more complex picture. Later genetic analysis from another site, this time in Croatia, looked at the DNA of a different Neanderthal. This individual did not have the red hair version of the MC1R gene. Their version was the one associated with producing dark pigment. This Neanderthal likely had dark hair, probably brown or black, and their skin was likely darker too, maybe an olive or light brown tone. Then came even more data from other Neanderthals, including from the Vindija cave in Croatia and the Denisova cave in Siberia. Scientists started to look at a whole suite of genes related to pigmentation, not just MC1R. What they found was a mix. They found genetic variants associated with both light and dark skin tones. They found variants associated with brown and black hair, and they found the red hair variant. The picture that emerges is one of diversity. Just like modern Europeans, Neanderthals in Europe were not a single color. It seems they had the full range of hair colors we see in modern Europeans, except perhaps for true blonde. The genetics for blonde hair seem to be a more recent development in modern humans. But red, brown, and black hair all seem to have been present in the Neanderthal population. Some of them would have looked like they came from Ireland, others might have looked more like they came from Italy or Greece. This makes perfect sense. Neanderthals lived across a continent with different climates. A Neanderthal living on the Mediterranean coast would have gotten a lot more sun than one living in northern Germany during an ice age. It's logical that their skin and hair color would adapt to those local conditions over thousands of generations. The group in the south might retain darker features for UV protection, while the group in the north would develop lighter ones to maximize vitamin D synthesis. The variation we see in the genes reflects a population that was successfully adapted to a wide range of environments. They were not static, they were evolving. What about their eyes? Eye color is a bit more complicated than red hair. It's not controlled by a single gene with a simple on-off switch. Several genes work together to determine how much and what kind of pigment is in the iris. The main genes are called OCA2 and HERC2. In modern humans, these genes have variants that can reduce the amount of pigment in the iris, leading to blue, green, or hazel eyes. Your brown eyes are the default, they just have a lot of eumelanin. Blue eyes have very little pigment at all. The blue color is not from a blue pigment, but is a structural effect. The way the sky looks blue because of how light scatters. When scientists looked at the Neanderthal genome for these eye color genes, they found some interesting clues. They did not find the specific key variants of OK2 and HERC2 that are overwhelmingly responsible for blue eyes in modern Europeans. This suggests that the classic bright blue eye color might have been rare or absent in Neanderthals. It seems to be a trait that became common in modern humans only after we split from the Neanderthal lineage. However, the story doesn't end there. They did find other variants in Neanderthal DNA that are associated with a whole spectrum of colors in modern people. They had genes linked to brown eyes. They also had versions of genes that in us are associated with hazel or green eyes and lighter hair colors. So, while a population of blue-eyed Neanderthals is unlikely, it's entirely possible they had a range of eye colors. Brown was likely the most common, but it's plausible that some had lighter eyes, perhaps hazel, amber, or green. Just like with hair color, the answer is not one thing. It's a palette of possibilities. A Neanderthal with red hair and green eyes is not just a fantasy. It's a combination that is consistent with the genetic evidence we have so far. Now we can start to build a more complete picture. Let's step away from the individual genes and try to visualize a Neanderthal. We know from their skeletons what their faces were shaped like. They had a long, low skull, not a tall, rounded one like ours. They had a pronounced brow ridge, a bony visor over their eyes. Their faces were large and projected forward, especially in the middle. They had big noses, which might have been an adaptation to warm and humidify the cold, dry air of Ice Age Europe. And they famously lacked a prominent chin. Take that facial structure. Now add the coloring we've discovered. Imagine one Neanderthal with pale, freckled skin, a shock of thick, red hair, and maybe piercing hazel eyes. Now imagine another one from a different clan, a different time. This one has olive skin that tans in the summer sun. Their hair is a deep, dark brown. Their eyes are the color of coffee. Both are Neanderthals. Both are authentic possibilities based on the science we have today. This diversity is not just an interesting detail, it humanizes them. For so long, we defined ourselves by being different from them. We were the smart, creative, advanced ones. They were the primitive dead end. But the more we learn, the more that line blurs. They weren't grunting brutes. They created tools, they controlled fire, they hunted big game in coordinated groups. They cared for their sick and elderly. There is evidence they buried their dead. They may have had some form of symbolic thought, creating simple jewelry or using pigments for decoration. And now we know they looked varied, just like us. They had different complexions. They adapted to their environment, just like us. This shared humanity becomes even more profound when we consider the final piece of the genetic puzzle, the interbreeding. We now know that when modern humans migrated out of Africa and into Europe and Asia, they met the Neanderthals, who were already living there. And they didn't just compete with them. They had children with them. The proof is in our DNA today. If your ancestry is from outside of sub-Saharan Africa, you have Neanderthal DNA in your genome. On average, it's about 1 to 2%. This is not junk DNA. These aren't just silent echoes of an ancient encounter. Many of these Neanderthal genes were, and still are, active. They do things. And what's remarkable is that many of the Neanderthal genes that were kept, that were seemingly beneficial to modern humans, are related to skin and hair. Modern humans, fresh out of Africa, were adapted for a sunny, tropical environment. They had dark skin, hair, and eyes. When they arrived in cloudy northern Europe, they were at a disadvantage. They needed to adapt, and fast. Interbreeding with Neanderthals offered a genetic shortcut. The Neanderthals had already spent hundreds of thousands of years adapting to this environment. They had already developed the mutations for lighter skin and different hair types that were suited to the north. By interbreeding, modern humans picked up some of these prepackaged, ready-to-use Neanderthal adaptations. Scientists have identified several Neanderthal gene variants in modern Europeans and Asians that influence keratin, the protein that makes up our hair and skin. These genes may have given the newcomers thicker skin and hair, better insulating them from the cold. Other Neanderthal genes that we've retained are involved in skin pigmentation. Some of these variants are associated with a person's ability to tan or their risk of sunburn. In essence, our ancestors borrowed from the Neanderthal genetic toolkit to help them survive in a new land. So when we ask about Neanderthal hair and eye color, we are, in a small way, asking about our own. Some of the diversity in skin and hair we see in people today is a direct legacy of those ancient encounters. A trace of the Neanderthal look is still walking around, embedded in our own cells. People with red hair and pale skin at El Sidron may have been a separate branch of humanity, but their evolutionary story rhymes with ours. They faced the same challenges and their bodies found similar solutions. The image of the Neanderthal has been completely transformed. Gone is the dim, hairy, uniform caveman. In his place is a person who could have had red hair or brown hair or black hair. A person who could have had brown eyes, or maybe even green. A person whose family stretched across a continent with faces that changed from region to region, from one millennium to the next. Our knowledge is still incomplete. We only have high-quality DNA from a handful of individuals. Each new discovery adds another brushstroke to the portrait, but the picture that is emerging is clear. They were not. They were a parallel version of humanity, complex, diverse, and adaptable, and a part of them, a very real, physical part, lives on in us. The next time you see someone with red hair, it's worth remembering that it's a color with a very long history. It's a color that evolved more than once on the human family tree. It lit up the faces of our ancient cousins who walked the frozen plains of Europe long before we did, living under the same sun.